Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Soccer for Us. We are 2 weeks from the start of the World Cup. The US men play Wales on Monday, November 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We are just about 2 weeks away from that date. So it's a good time to kind of talk about everything that's led us to this point and what we really expect going forward. We will have a roster reaction episode when that roster drops on Wednesday. But for now, let's just kind of take big picture approach to what's going on here. And to do that, I'm bringing back the guy who I have talked with a lot throughout this process and who has helped me process my feelings and get through the stressful nature of qualifying and all the other things around it. It's Caleb Cook of USMNT Corner. Caleb, thanks for joining me. We're 2 weeks away. Have you got your Tums by your bedside? Are you ready to go? Are you stocked up in all the heartburn medication?
I am so pumped. I can't even explain it. I talk about it probably 10 times a day to friends, family, student, anybody that'll listen. I'm sure everyone's getting annoyed. It's like Christmas Day. Like I'm so freaking excited. But yeah, I mean, you want to talk about Tums? We got a big day coming up on Wednesday, and I'm probably gonna have to, you know, go with the Tums, some Tylenol, some Excedrin, some ibuprofen. It's gonna be some tummy aches and some headaches going on. A lot of rumbling and grumbling, and we'll see. But I mean, I'm excited. Whatever happens with the roster, like you said, we'll talk about it. Um, it is what it is. We can cry and complain all we want, but those are the boys that are gonna uh, represent us in the World Cup. So yeah, I'm nervous because who knows what Greg's gonna do. Greg's gonna Greg, right? He's shown time and time again Greg's gonna Greg, but I'm so pumped. Like I'm rambling right now because I'm like the energy. I can't I can't even explain it.
It is definitely an exciting time. I know a lot of people have felt like this World Cup hasn't quite had the hype leading into it, and I definitely think that purely is because of the fact that we have like actual live soccer seasons going on right now of like the biggest leagues in the world. Like we just had Champions League like last week, right? So obviously there has been a little bit of a lack of focus on the fact that the World Cup is in 2 weeks. But I just, once it comes here and starts, I think that all of that will go away and we'll be so hyped and focused on this tournament. We had honestly, we had a great summer with the women's Euro that people were hype and talking about, and that was just for a European continental competition. I'm sure that the World Cup will find its way to be as talked about as that was. But I think before we get before we start looking at the tournament itself, and I think it's something that we as fans didn't really reflect on enough in the both when it happened and then in kind of the short term after that. The fact that we qualified for the World Cup again. And 4 years ago, that wasn't true. We missed out the last World Cup. We were not there in Russia. We had a lot of fans there, but our team was not represented. And the feelings that we all had October 2017 after a debacle in Cuba and then a debacle of results and goals that weren't goals and goals that came off of people's heads and everything that eventually eliminated us from qualifying for the 2018 World Cup. I don't think we took enough time to like accept and realize and like rejoice in the fact that we qualified. And so I think it's good to kind of start from that point and just think of the fact that like, man, almost 5 years ago now, this would not have been a reality. And we're back here ready to start a World Cup and watch the US men play. And it's amazing.
Well, I think, to add to that perspective, just how young we are, the fact that it didn't happen, like you said, and then now we've done it despite being, I mean, for lack of a better term, stupid young. Like, it's ridiculous how young
Yeah.
our group
Yeah.
is. Um, but that's also what adds to the excitement. And then you know, it's always exciting around NFL draft time, right? Because you're looking at the future, this hope, you know, when you're looking at an NBA draft, like what's the next prospect? It's always been um, something we can do as a US uh, fandom is looking at the new young kids coming up, and it's like, okay, we're not looking at like one or two young kids that can come up and help us. Like, we're looking at the entire group. They're all young studs, and they're going to get thrown into the fire because they're going to take their first step onto that pitch on November 21st, and it's going to hit them. Um, there is no excitement about prospects anymore. You're not a prospect
Yeah.
anymore. You are the team. Doesn't matter how young you are. So it's crazy when you think about the fact that like these are kids. These are
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
Um, and like you said, I feel like it's important to just kind of take a step back and say, you know, we made it. We did it despite all odds. Um, because I think people want to take it for granted. You can't take it for granted. We had veterans not be able to do it.
Hmm.
You know, we talk about lost generation all the time. That's what we witnessed,
Yeah.
but
But we still
they
had
couldn't
some of
make
our
it
greatest
happen.
players ever on the field that night. I mean, you think about we had Clint Dempsey, we had Josie
Yeah,
Altidore, we had Michael Bradley, we had Tim Howard on
right.
that field that night. And they weren't able to do it. And obviously there are reasons for that. But
Yeah,
you know, we have to think about the fact that this team of incredibly young guys navigated qualifying.
mhm,
It wasn't the easiest, it wasn't the most smooth sailing. Obviously, you and
no,
I think this is why we didn't really reflect on the fact that the joy of qualifying, because there's so much consternation about the fact that even though we qualified, it was by the slightest of margins. But you and I talked about it throughout qualifying. There are still a lot of things that this team needs to improve upon. But we are so young and so talented and so promising that man, it's like it's so exciting to think the fact that, like, I mean, fingers crossed, knock on wood, that we're gonna get to watch Gio Reyna play in a World Cup in just like what 2 weeks. You know, we're gonna
yeah,
see Christian Pulisic actually play in a World Cup after his just utter like heart ripped out of his chest moment 5 years ago. You know, and there's even some guys who, I mean, we don't know what the roster exactly is, but like obviously we kind of know who the locks are. There are guys that even like with the Walker Zimmerman, who has played such a great game in MLS for so many years that he finally gets rewarded with a World Cup chance. You've got a guy
mhm,
like DeAndre Yedlin who's going to go back to a World Cup. How exciting is that? Those are real human emotions that they're about to feel, and we have to sometimes, you know, as fans, we tend to go up and down a lot with our emotions, but so do the players, and this is definitely one of the highs. I mean, the guys who got calls, most likely they got calls today or they'll get them tomorrow. You know, that feeling has to be the ultimate achievement of an athletic career up to you at this point, you know?
yeah. I mean, you saw some of the videos that were on Twitter, like the Richarlison one, when it showed he was with his family and it showed that he was
Yeah.
selected for the Brazil World Cup squad and how much it means to him. And it doesn't matter amount of fame you have, how much money you're making. I mean, Alexi Lawless tweeted about it. Like, World Cups are different. You
Yeah.
know, the chance to represent your country, like it's something. It's different. It's like, you know, kids that play little league baseball and then make it to the minors, make it to the majors. Like, playing in a World Series is what kids do, right? You go outside, you got a little sand lot, and you pretend it's the bottom of the ninth in the World Series, right? It's the same thing in soccer, but it's a bigger stage. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
just the United States we're talking about here. We're talking about the World Cup. It is the biggest event in sports, and to be able to represent your country, I mean, I cannot even imagine the amount of pride that these guys are feeling. And then on the flip side, some of the guys that were right there on the bubble that are not going to make it, um, the heartbreak that they're
Yeah.
feeling if if they're healthy and they just don't make the cut, and then even the ones that Miles Robinson, he's already known obviously for a while because the injury happened a while ago, missing out simply because of that, and then Chris Richards being so close and then just not quite ready. I mean, my heart goes out to those guys that you got to feel for them. There's just so much emotion,
Yeah.
so much emotion. I can't even think about how I'm gonna feel watching that first, like watching the players take the field. Like I'll probably tear up, to be honest with you, just because it's been almost a decade
Yeah.
since we've been able to
Yeah.
watch that, and I'm gonna be able to watch it with my kids for the
Yeah.
first time. Like
And
it's gonna
that's
be
the cool part,
incredible.
right? Like that's the thing about the World Cup that we don't think about in the moment because we are always, especially you and I, we're analytical soccer fans, right? We're not just watching the game because we're excited about it. We're watching because we love watching it. We played it, we felt it. But like the fact that you're going to get to watch with your kids, you're going to be one of many parents around the country who are going to bring their child with them to a soccer bar or in front of the TV and say, we're watching this and we get to watch this together. Some dads and may be up at 5 a.m. doing a diaper change, and so that's why they're going to start watching. Some may be like you and have older kids who probably aren't going to be up that early, but will definitely be excited to watch the game when it comes on in that mid-morning time slot. It will be something that hopefully, I mean, I truly mean this. Like, I think that what bothered me most about 2018, right, was that soccer was on such a good trajectory of like fandom in this nation, right? Like
Mhm.
I remember 2002. So that's the first men's World Cup that I remember. Obviously, I remember 1999. That was when I kind of first like fell in love with soccer, was watching the women win in 99. But like
Mhm.
2002, remember like, oh, I have to wake up for this, right? But that was just me. Like my parents didn't really care, other than like, oh, did he win? Great, And I didn't really have a whole lot of friends who were that into it. 2006 rolls around. Now we're talking about having watch parties at my house. We're gathered to watch qualifying games. Like I specifically remember we all got together to watch the U.S. beat Mexico and Columbus in 2005. Like just that growth. In 2010, we have the Donovan goal moment, that everyone remembers and everyone knows
Everyone.
where they were that day, that time. But like it kept getting bigger and bigger. 2014 was actually a really cool moment for me personally. I was in grad school at that time, so I was like of drinking age, fully able to like. I was at WVU, so I was like in a college town that summer actually. So it was like really fucking cool. Wow, I just cursed on
Mhm.
the podcast. It was really cool to like experience this with your friends, like in the way that it's supposed to be experienced. And then
Yeah.
2018, it doesn't happen. And it was
Mm.
just we were like, you look at Premier League viewership numbers, you look at MLS viewership numbers, you look at US viewership numbers, you look at all of that, and just the growth that we've been on. And 2018, I don't think it necessarily killed it in terms of popularity, but I think it did stunt a little bit the growth of the US game, the US team, maybe. But now we have a lot of young, exciting players who are playing for these big clubs that all these people watch week in and week out. I mean, you have players at Chelsea, Dortmund, Juventus. You had one at Barcelona, but now he's with AC Milan. Like you have
Mhm.
players at clubs that people have been watching for a very long time. And then you add like Adams and Aronson at Leeds,
Mhm.
Ream and Jedi at Fulham. Like you have all these players who are at notable clubs, and just how great it's going to be, the fact that we've had American fans watching these teams, these clubs play because for some reason they are fans of them. And now they're going to get to have a US player represent not only their nation, but also their club at a World Cup. And I'm just really hopeful that like the game really does kind of have this explosion as we move forward to 2026. Like this is a very big tournament in my mind for the growth of the game. And I don't want to put too many expectations on the guys because I don't think it's like that serious. Like I don't think we have to win it, but it's
Right.
just nice to have it back.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, it's an important tournament. Looking forward to 2026 when it's here, I think it's massive. Um, I think every single World Cup is that moment because of it's so magical. It locks in young fans. Um, so that's one of the biggest disappointments about 2018 was the fact that,
Yep.
my kids were the age of being able to understand what was happening, yet it was lost. Um, that's why I'm so excited about this one. But even looking at players, you go back to 2014 and DeAndre Yedlin used the World Cup to launch him over to
Yeah.
Europe. Tottenham picked him up because of his performances at such a young age, thinking, okay, here's a young, exciting prospect. And that was at a time where Americans weren't getting a ton of
Yeah.
opportunities in Europe like they are now. So you look
Yeah.
at what they're already doing in Europe, and you look at a Brendan Aronson and a Tyler Adams at Leeds and the way they're playing, and then you have more Americans go on a world stage and have those performances. There's just going to be more and more doors opened.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to not have these gaps. Like I can't even imagine what it's like in Italy. Two
Right.
cycles in a row now.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think like you said, such an important um, tournament, and the fact that we made it, it's just fandom, viewership, uh, locking in kids for lifetimes of
Yeah.
soccer heartbreak. um, but I just you can't state the importance of what a World Cup means to a country, even if it's a Brazil.
Yeah.
Much, much more when you're talking about a country like US where it needs to grow.
And we're also at a good point right now with soccer in the United States where you have 28 clubs in MLS who have, in relatively big cities that are cultivating great support in those cities for the most part. So you have people in those markets who are familiar, right? Oh, soccer exists. Hopefully they feel that way. You have USL 1 and 2 and championship level, probably more championship than USL 1, but like you have that level where you have a grassroots more feeling of their support for those teams. And you even have more grassroots with NISA and UPSL and all these things. There's a lot of ways to support soccer in the US right now. And I'm hoping that this World Cup does catch those interested I think it's not quite the same because obviously they're on like different tracks and scales, but I think about the way that um, for those who don't know, I often dabble in curling. It's not like the biggest hobby of mine, but I do go curl and I watch it quite a bit. And obviously the US men took gold in 2018. But before that, people don't know, in 2006, the US men, when it was in, what was that, Torino, they finished third, actually, which is a pretty decent, result. And the way that team and that sport captured people by just watching it, obviously people brand new exposed. The uptick in not only curlers, period, but curling clubs skyrocketed in the US. And it's just, it's kind of increased year by year. The soccer has kind of been able to do this where professional clubs continue to grow. We have a very good women's league and a burgeoning the second division women's league. You have a very steady men's professional top tier with a second division that is really steady as well, and even a third and fourth division that's like viable, right? Things that we have never had. Like, okay, this is super theoretical, and I'm sorry, or philosophic, but like when people talk to me about pro rel for the USA, which it's like we haven't had a third tier be viable for more than like a couple years in a row. And you would want pro rel for that? Like the
Right.
US soccer right now is at such a good point and such a healthy point. Now, granted, there's a lot of structural issues and administrative issues that we could talk about, and that's valid. But at its core, the health of the sport here in the country is very good. So having a World Cup like this, being able to again bookend, like hopefully you get the 2022 Men's World Cup, and then like 9 months later you get the Women's World Cup. Hopefully this really does help cement soccer as fourth or third most popular sport in the country at this point in time.
Oh, absolutely. I think, like you said, it's already on its way. And I think the World Cup, it's just going to be just pushing it that much further in the right direction. And, you know, as far as the casual fan, they don't understand that this World Cup being thrown in the middle of a European season, like it's
They
everything
don't
about
really,
it
yeah.
logistically, they don't understand that. Like we get that, we are irritated about it, whatever. They're just understanding that, oh wow, there's soccer on right now. Like
Yeah.
we're talking about USA versus England on Black Friday. That's going to
Yeah.
be
At
like
2 p.m.
the
on Black
numbers,
Friday.
the ratings and the numbers on that game are going to be astronomical.
Insane.
Um,
Insane.
it's 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 prime time. So all these casual fans, they're gonna have eyes on it. Why not? Um, yeah, I think, like I said, it's going in the right direction. This is just gonna be, you know, like the Santa Claus on the Christmas story
Yeah.
when he kicks the kid down the slide. You're already going in the right direction. Let me give you a little boost here.
Yep.
Um, that's what we're gonna see.
It it stands to reason that this we're both excited. We're both getting giddy about the prospects. But let's again kind of start from the beginning here, right? Let's start at that Cuba game in 2017 when it became very apparent that we were not going to be participating in the 2018 World Cup. We go from that sheer dejection to the 2018 season with Dave Sarachan. That was it was a weird holding pattern. I
Yeah,
think it's fair to say that it took U.S. Soccer too long to find a coach, but also it was not pressing, right? Because 2018 wasn't about building for the future necessarily. It really wasn't. I mean, we did see the beginning of the careers of the USMNT senior careers of a lot of these guys. I mean, Tim Weah, Weston McKinney, I
mhm.
think Tyler Adams, all these
Tyler
guys
Adams.
got runs out during that year. But
Mhm.
it did feel like it was a little bit of a lost year. And then we go to 2019 when Greg Berhalter finally takes over. Do you feel like it took too long for him to get in place? Do you feel like, you know, it felt like, at least I think the general consensus was that they always wanted Berhalter,
Yeah.
but they wanted to wait for him to finish his club season at Columbus again because there wasn't a hurry. It's not like there was a tournament you had to win the next month.
No.
But do you
Yeah. I
not?
mean,
Do
I
you
think
think that maybe that just took too long?
that's exactly what happened. I mean, it was going to be Berhalter the entire time, and he was going to finish his club season, so they waited. And yeah, it's frustrating as a fan because, well, it's frustrating depending on what you want. If you want Greg Berhalter, then you're happy because whatever you got, what you got, you got what you wanted. But there were a lot of guys out there that you could have interviewed if you're the U.S. Soccer Federation, uh, and you did, quote unquote, but they weren't real. You knew what you were going to do. So there was a year with the Saracen era, right?
Yeah.
That we weren't building towards anything. It was just games. Like you said, yeah, there were some players that, got some call ups and got their feet wet on an international stage. But as far as building towards a cycle, building towards something that we're going to ride into a World Cup, you know, there was none of that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a lost year. So instead of a 4-year cycle, it was a 3-year cycle type thing. Um, and when you don't have the talent of some of these big European countries, a year hurts. And I
Well,
think
a
that's one
year
of the biggest
hurts.
frustrations. Yeah.
A year hurts when you then consider 2019 was basically a year spent for Greg Berhalter to implement his system. And we have bemoaned the capital T, capital S trademark system for a very long time because in 2019, that was what it was. It
Mhm.
was the system, and he was making damn sure that that's what we were going to play.
Mm.
And it became very apparent in 2019 that that was not the best way to actually win at the international level. He did okay in the 2019 Gold Cup. I mean, I do think that we forget that we looked horrible in several friendlies leading up to the Gold Cup. We make the Gold Cup final. We lose to Mexico. We didn't look terrible, but we weren't good.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go and you lose to Mexico in the September by like 3-0 and look absolutely trash.
Awful.
Yeah, but you're like
Awful.
all the Uruguay game that was so uninspiring that I think people wanted to like stop watching soccer forever. But it did feel a little bit like Berhalter spent too much time forcing his system. And that's where we got players like Will Trapp. We still had to have Michael Bradley run out there. And then we run into October where, yes, we get a good result against Cuba at home in Nations League. But then we go up to Toronto and get absolutely smacked by Canada. I mean, lost 2-0, looked bad. Canada looked so much hungrier, and which, by the way, is a theme that kind of persists throughout. But, we looked bad. Our defensive shape didn't work. Our attacking philosophy didn't work. So we went 10 months into 2019 for Greg Berhalter to realize, oh, this probably isn't the best way to go forward. So then we changed things up a lot against Canada when we come home, beat them 4-1 in Orlando in Nations League, then turn around and beat Cuba in a fairly meaningless game and qualify for Nations League final. So that's fine. We have a January friendly against, I don't even know, probably, I think that was a Costa Rica one, right? That was Ulises Yanez getting his penalty kick goal.
With the penalty kick.
Yeah, 2000 or 2020 to open that. Yeah. Trying to go through my head all these things sometimes. So 2020 opens up with, an okay start. Like Greg Berhalter brought in a lot of young guys. He used that January camp for what I thought was a fairly good purpose of like getting a lot of young guys, see what they're used for. Well, then COVID. So we lost a good bit of 2020, and I do feel like the point I'm trying to make here is I feel like a lot of this cycle was lost due to not trying to hasten the coaching search, expediently enough. A 2019 year where the coach was so hell-bent on making his style of play work at the international level, realizing 10 months in that this is not the best way to play soccer at the international level and having to scrap it and move forward. Going through 2020, where you were not really able to play soccer, you certainly weren't hosting camps. I mean, we played some friendlies that were with mostly good squads, but still incomplete squads, I think is the best way to describe it. All of that to lead up into 2021 when qualifying began and having to not only navigate kind of merging the MLS-based players with the European-based players, because up until that we hadn't been able to get the two together really. You have a Nations League final that I think we finally saw more of how we wanted the U.S. to play. Am I wrong? Like that Nations League was a little bit more like, oh yeah, this might be the way that we can win some games here. Not the Honduras game, because that was ugly. But that Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, the evolution that you're talking about kind of, and I guess to foreshadow a bit to these last friendlies that we just played, it's almost like Greg tried to bring us back to what he was trying to do in the beginning, which is very, very difficult for me to comprehend and understand. But
Because he's
there
stubborn.
was,
This.
yeah, but like, why would you try 2 friendlies before the World Cup? But you're talking about the progression. There was a decent progression, and then you see really good performances against Mexico, our biggest rival, the best competition you're going to face in CONCACAF, and we're playing them well. But there was so much. It was almost like a roller coaster. It was like we play really well, we play like terrible, like trash. We play really well, we play like trash. And it's like, where's the consistency? Is it because Greg's tinkering and he keeps changing things every other game, every other match? Or are the players confused because what he's trying to tell them is not making sense? Like, why was it and why has it been such an up and down roller coaster his entire tenure?
Yeah. Well, I think you can look at there's a couple of matches that stick out for me of like, wait, how are these teams the same? The first is that Honduras match in Nations League and then the Mexico match in Nations League, where the Honduras match was like slow, painful to watch. Nothing was really working offensively. But the Mexico match was very much like, okay, we're like defensively, we were a little not great, but like there was a clear plan of weather the storm against Mexico, get the ball, get a couple passes, go forward, try to beat them one-on-one and disrupt them in the box. Like there is a little bit more of a cohesive plan of like what Berhalter would have liked to see. There's a little bit more possession in terms of like building through that. Not building out of the back, but building with possession. There is a plan. Not that there wasn't against Honduras, but it wasn't working, right? Then I look at the window where you have Jamaica at home in Austin, where you probably should have beat them by more than 2-0. I think we got a little unlucky to not score more goals than we did, but that seems to also be a theme with this Berhalter team. And then you go down to Panama and lose to Panama for the first time ever. And that game was terrible. And the difference here, I think, is like, it was the worst game of like worse than the Canada game, like that we lost,
Yeah.
right? But like the Honduras versus Mexico game was more about like, okay, the players were fairly similar, but like this style of trying to continually build possession and disrupt the opponent with the ball and all these things, disorganize the opponent with the ball, all these things that Berhalter talks about is a little bit foolish given this set of players. The Mexico game was a little bit more straightforward, simple plan, which they always seem to have been. So that's more of a Berhalter issue, right? Of a system issue, I should say. But the Panama game versus the Jamaica game seems to me to be a Berhalter issue from player selection. And it goes back to the point that we've always had with him is he doesn't pick lineups or rosters very well. And that's why we're both a little concerned. And we'll talk more about Berhalter specifically. But I think that's just when you talk about inconsistency, that's the problem, is that the system itself has kind of become a little bit more like clear and solidified. We kind of understand the way we want to play, the general tenets. Do I think that he was a little too like, we must do this against Japan and Saudi Arabia? Yes, we've seen him do that in friendlies before. So I'm hoping that like when it comes time to actually win games, it won't be as committed to that. But sometimes he gets the team so focused on certain things to do that we forget to play soccer. But sometimes he puts a lineup out there that has Giassi Zardes starting with Paul Arriola next to him and Sebastian Lletget and Kellen Acosta as your two, quote, attacking midfielders that we already saw that didn't work. And it's sometimes he just runs out things that we know don't work, but he tries to do it anyway. So that the inconsistency is a big problem. And that's kind of what I would say sums up the qualification process was inconsistency.
I mean, and I don't know if it's just the message he has to the players before the games where he thinks, okay, we probably match up better against this team. Let's try to control this game. And that's where we see the slow lack of creativity, difficulty in creating chances versus when we play in Mexico, he's like, all right, let's simplify things. And then you look at the performances and you look at the results, you're like, maybe if we had the same thought process and game plan for every match, regardless of what the opponent is, I don't know, maybe our boys would play better. So I'm hoping to God that that he understands that and he sees that. And when we go into the World Cup, he's not gonna overthink things like the two friendlies we saw where we got Japan, Saudi Arabia. We're gonna control this. We're better than they are. Let's go. No. Stop. Just go play soccer the way we've played against Mexico the last 4 times we've met them. Be that team.
Yep.
Go play with those tactics and that understanding. Let's try that. But like, I don't feel like it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at performances and see, okay, this is good, this was bad.
Yeah.
If this was good, let's try this again, right? Like that is childish. That's elementary level understanding.
Yeah. We know he loves a PowerPoint presentation, so it bothers me why we're not picking out the things we did well against Mexico, the things we did well against Jamaica at home, the things we did well against Costa Rica at home, the things we did, and I always say home because we didn't really have a good road performance outside of Honduras, and that was a desperation. But even to an extent, that El Salvador game on the road, it was like, yeah, it's our first qualifying performance. It was a little shaky, but like we created chances. We created chances against Uruguay, against Morocco. So where does that come into play? Because it still bothers me that from a whole, the system is not producing the amount of goals that you would hope a positional play system would produce.
Well, I mean, and I forget who says it. I'm going to be super irritated because you're probably going to tell me. I forget who says it, but they said, soccer's not hard. Coaches make it hard, right? Soccer's easy.
Yeah.
Coaches make it
Yeah.
hard. Greg Berhalter is the epitome of that quote, of that saying. He is trying to create a dissertation based on a 5 crown coloring book.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that hard. You see the results. It's plain. The
Yeah.
results are there, yet we're trying to recreate something that doesn't need to be recreated. And it's just, we've banged our head against our desks multiple times throughout the world qualifying process. So to get into all that is, crazy, but talking about it and trying to rehash it, it's bringing up all these frustrations, and because it's not that hard.
Yeah.
It really
Especially when you
isn't.
have some good players.
Yeah, the talent that we have is stupid to be trying to do what he's doing.
And that's where I kind of want to focus next is we can talk about Berhalter for a very long time and the frustrations we have with them. And I think a lot of people have a lot of frustration with Berhalter.
It's fair.
But at the end of the day, we also have some really exciting young talent to watch on this team. We have players at just about every position that make you excited to watch soccer, right?
Yes.
Let's focus on that, because I think that we can talk about Christian Pulisic, who, as a young man in 2017, had probably the most crushing experience a U.S. soccer player has ever had. And I mean ever, because we've had some bad losses in some tournaments, but for 6 years in a row, or 6 cups in a row, it was a birthright of an American soccer player to go to the World Cup. 1990, we earned it. It was great. But before that, the expectation of not going to a World Cup wasn't there. But in 2017, the expectation was you make the World Cup and you get out of your group. That's been the expectation for the U.S. since 2002. And Christian Pulisic was part of a team that didn't do that. But now he's captaining, and we can debate if he should be captain or not, but he's captaining the team that has a chance to make some real noise in this tournament, because you've got some big names in your group. You've got a game against England, against Wales, and a game against a very good Iran team. So when you look at how Pulisic has progressed on the U.S. national team, what thing sticks out to you most?
Well, I think, first of all, the images of him like kneeling on the field, and the articles talking about him crying in the shower, like
Yes.
he would
Yes.
have been a 4 World Cup player for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And now he won't. And that is so difficult of a pill to swallow as a 17-year-old kid. But what we've seen up to this point, I think, is a maturing of a kid because he's still a kid. Like he's what
Yeah.
is 23? He's
He's
still
24. Yeah. Yeah. He's still
24. Yeah,
very
yeah.
young.
He's still a kid. And so you look at the the interview where he was saying that he was putting too much pressure on him. I think he finally let that go. He finally got to a point where he realized, okay, I don't have to do every single thing on the field. I can trust my teammates. I think he's becoming a bit more free on the field. I think we're going to see a I think we're going to see an unleashed Christian Pulisic in the
Yeah.
2022 World Cup. I think he's going to play a man possessed. Um, and I cannot wait to see him and to see what he's going to do in these
Yeah.
3 guaranteed games and hopefully more.
I think you hit on kind of that roller coaster that he's had to feel because when he came on, when he was, I mean, I think he was 17 when he first made his qualifying debut. He was 18, I want to say, when maybe 19 when that failure happened. He wasn't expected to do everything. He was just supposed to be the cool kid, the young kid who ran around a lot, got in good positions, and hey, go have fun type of thing, right? Like he wasn't. The expectation was that he would just play like he's supposed to play, and good things would happen. But I do think that the 3 to 4 years after that, he definitely felt the need to bring us back to glory, because he was one of the very few holdovers from that team. And I mean, very few. I mean, there's a couple on this team now, Acosta, Areola, Yedlin, obviously, but like a lot of the guys who were even part of the 2017 debacle, very few of them have even been a part of qualifying, let alone, actually, I don't think outside of Acosta and Yedlin, and Areola, any of them have. We lost a lot of good leaders, and I do think that there's been an expectation on Pooley's shoulders that he would be the leader because he had the most experience of a lot of those guys, right? And not only did he have experience, but he was good.
Yes.
But now I think that as you see Tyler Adams, who is younger, but I think a little bit more mature, better leader in terms of just like calm head. Not better leader in terms of like maybe motivation, but definitely a leader when it comes to being a calm head. You have guys like Walker Zimmerman who have come into this camp and kind of had the older brother vibe of like, oh, he's cool, but like, oh, we got to listen to him because he kind of knows what's up. He's had people be able to come in and be leaders in their own right, which allows him to focus more on playing soccer. And that's kind of what I saw after that January with this team of like, oh, I can just play soccer, because maybe during that January camp, he learned the January 22 camp, maybe he learned a little bit like, oh, there are guys on this team who can help galvanize the troops, help show how things need to be done. I don't have to do that anymore. I can focus on soccer. I'm hoping that that's the Christian Pulisic we get in in Qatar against Wales, England, and Iran, because we need him to be good. But he's not the only one, and I think that's the biggest point that I would like to make now is like he's not the only dude. We have other dudes. We have a dude named Weston McKennie who, on his day, is an unbeatable player.
Mm-hmm.
We have guys like Timothy Weah, who is a phenomenally talented player, but kind of sticks to his own thing and does what he does, and he's good at it. You have other players who can make magic happen, right? Yunus Musa. And I think that's going to help Christian. Who of that kind of like group of other guys are you looking at with the most excitement coming up?
Oh man, I mean, like you said, on his day, talking about Weston McKennie, I think he's the type of player who rises to the occasion.
Yeah.
And what bigger occasion than the World Cup? I think we
Right.
see some phenomenal performances from him. Um, Yunus Musa, you got to think he's going to be on fire playing against England. He's got a lot to prove, and he knows he can get a big move if he plays well and performs. And I think a lot of guys understand that. Um, you know, I'm sure there are major clubs looking at Gio Reyna already. Gio Reyna comes in and has a lights out World Cup. I mean, you got to think some of the biggest clubs are going to be, fighting over him. And I think a lot of the players understand that. They understand the stakes of having a good performance. It's not just, do the best you can. Not only are you representing your country, you are setting your future up. And I think there's a lot of guys that they don't shy away from that exposure, from that spotlight. They thrive in it. Um, and I think we're going to see some big performances. And I think Tyler Adams is just going to continue what he's doing at Leeds. And I think we see the same exact thing for the U.S. I think he's going to just be an absolute boss. And like you said, with Pulisic, all those guys that we just mentioned that we're excited to see, they're going to help take all that weight off his shoulders.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it was up, and they were already doing it. It was up to him to realize it and take the weight off his own shoulders. Like he was the one that was
Yes.
holding it on,
Yes.
and rightfully so. Um, he was the one who had to deal with that heart like shattering moment in 2017. Those other guys didn't. Um, but I think they've helped him. But ultimately, it was him that had to understand what was going on and realize that he's pressing too hard. He's trying too hard. He's creating and making moments too hard for himself and too difficult for himself. And I think the process of qualifying helped, and then just ultimately qualifying itself,
Yeah.
just the weight's gone. And those main guys, the Pulisics, the McKinneys, Musa, Tyler Adams, and Gio Reyna, I think they're going to be stars. They're going to be stars.
Well, most of those guys brought up in the U.S. soccer system, but this team has a lot of guys who we had to recruit, and that's no different from a lot of previous U.S. World Cup squads. But we have some very key players who are dual nationals and chose to play for the United States. Both of our starting outside backs are going to be that Serginho Dest, Jedi Robinson. Probably one of our starting central midfielders, Yunus Musa, a guy who right now might be the starter, depending on how you look at it, and Ricardo Pepi. Even to an extent, Jesus Ferreira, who has Colombian heritage and had to switch from Colombia to the U.S. early in his career. We have a lot of guys who we've won over. I mean, Gio Reyna a little bit, but let's be honest here. He wasn't never going to play for the U.S. We have a lot of guys who are still very key contributors to this team who have that dual national heritage. And I think that makes this team, this is just, okay, my opinion, this is not a political statement. I very much apologize if you think this is, but I think that's what makes this team so American, is you have guys who were born and raised here, fought hard, brought up in the American style of play. And you have a lot of guys who have that dual national perspective and maybe have been born here or had a parent who is from here, but grew up and learned how to play in the European style. And that's always been both a very American essence of itself, but also the way that U.S. soccer seems to always be, right? Especially on the men's side, where you have the kids who grew up in America but are influenced by European styles and theories and tactics. And we kind of still have that, I mean, even Greg Berhalter to an extent is that, he went overseas and played in a lot of the smaller countries or leagues, I guess you could say, in Europe, Netherlands, and stuff, and coached over there. Um, this does feel like a team that still mirrors a lot of the teams from the past, despite it being such a more improved talent pool.
Yeah, I mean, you look at 2014, we had a German coach, so there was a lot of German influence in the team, but those players are still choosing to represent America,
Yes.
regardless of where they're grown up in, you know. But yeah, I mean, that is what makes America so special, is because we all, I mean, I guess you see it like with France. There's a lot of players that play for France that are, you know, more from the African culture and some of those places that were colonized by France. So you see it in some other countries, but
Yes.
I think it's more celebrated in America more than anywhere else, right? It's America's the melting pot of the world, you know. Um, and I think our team embraces that, you know, like you talked about Jedi and Sergino and Yunus Musa and Pepe, like the fact that they're dual nationals, there's no like, you know, sweeping it under the rug. Like it's almost like celebrated. Does that make sense? Like
Yep.
it's very, very upfront. Um, and it's like you said, it represents many teams in the past. Um, and it's no different now, but the level of talent, like you said, it is absolutely a different level. So I guess what we're trying to say is the way that it looks isn't much different, but the way that we play
Yes.
is.
Do you think it is? That's the biggest question that, and this is kind of where we'll wrap up, I guess is the best way to
Yeah,
say it.
yeah, I
Do
definitely
you
do.
think
I
that
think we're a
from,
much more technical
Berhalter
side.
had, oh, sorry, Berhalter had a vision when he was hired in 2019. Well, I guess the end of 2018, but he had a vision to change the way the world perceives American soccer. He had all these lofty tactical goals, disorganize the opponent with through possession and all these things. But ultimately, the goal, in a nutshell, was to make us a more tactically astute team. Do you think that is true now?
Tactically, no, I think tactically there are a lot of shortcomings. I think technically, and when I say that, I mean technical skills. This team is far and above,
Mm-hmm.
technically, above any roster we've ever had. So the ability to play different ways and play more possession style is there. But I don't know if Berhalter's the guy that is going to be bringing that style into the international stage. Like,
Right.
to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of the possession style, tiki taka type international level soccer, anyways. I think to do that, your chemistry has to be above and beyond what you can get on an international level because you don't
Yeah.
spend enough time together.
And
When
there are
you
plenty of reasons why that worked for the Spain teams from
exactly
2008 through
look at those
2012. There are a
rosters.
lot of reasons. Yeah.
Those rosters were from Barcelona and Real Madrid, and I think 2 guys were from, like, Villarreal.
Yeah.
That I mean, there you go.
And all
The
playing a
continuity is
style
there.
that was so
Exactly.
identifiable with Barcelona,
They've been playing that way for a decade or
Yeah.
more. You can't just come in and in, 3 years be like, "Yep, we're gonna change." That it's just not happening regardless of
Yeah.
how technically gifted and skilled our players are. So, to go back to the question, Tactically, no, we are not there yet, and we haven't just had a renaissance and a revelation of who we are as American soccer. No. Um, we are exciting because of our individual talent.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't think Greg gets the best out of the talent that we have.
Yeah, I think that's still the valid point, right? I also, not to defend Greg, but I think it's also important to point out that I don't think a national team manager, especially for this particular generation, was ever going to make us a more tactically astute team, because
Unfortunately.
that that does happen, like you said, when it comes to a decade, if not more, of playing a very identifiable way or playing with very consistent values and philosophies about soccer. And in the United States specifically, I think that's almost an impossible ask, is to have one unifying quote style of play, because even to like even England, with as much cultural diversity as they have when it comes to like the different parts, and Spain with all the cultural diversity they have with all their different regions, they all kind of did have a very similar way that they viewed soccer, how they thought soccer is was meant to play. And in the US, we just have way too many perspectives. And part of that is because we have too many influences. You know, we have Latino influences here in Georgia and more of the southern states. I mean, there are clubs that I referee that the entire club is Latino kids. You know, it's a Latino coach, and it's like I got to use Spanish to coach in or to referee an ECNL game. But then you also have a lot of coaches that I still have that are British, that speak with heavy British accents, that grew up playing in the British game. You know, you have a lot more of guys who are actual Americans who grew up playing soccer and are now coaching. But our influencers are so different that I don't think it was possible for one coach to be like, this is how America plays soccer now. But to your point, I think what we have done better as a soccer nation is just teach technical skills better. And we're seeing that now. And, you know, some people still bemoan that it doesn't happen as well as it could. And I think that's valid. But we are progressing. We're getting better. And each generation has more technical ability than the one before it.
Oh, I mean, honestly, in 20 years, I think the US is going to be a power. I really do. And I think honestly to kind of mirror that, what we just said about that, with Greg Berhalter, you talked about how he wasn't going to be the one to come in and change it. No one really could. It's kind of a tough ask. It's almost like an impossible ask. And that's what you said. And that's 100% true. And I think that's why it's so frustrating, because we know that, you know that, I know that, we all know that. So does Greg. Yeah, he still
Yeah.
tried. That's the biggest frustration. Like, stop trying to make us something that we cannot be. It's it's almost like the argument for Jesse Marsh, except for the difference is Jesse Marsh can implement his system and then go get help in January to play his
Yeah.
system. Greg
Yeah.
Berhalter cannot do that. Greg Berhalter only has the players that he has, and
Yeah.
that is the frustrating part. It's not hard to see. It's not hard to see. And then to talk about all the different influences within soccer, you talked about, you know, playing clubs that are completely Hispanic. A little story you talked about the British coaches. I just want you to know, and I want everybody here to know, that if you're a coach in America and you're British, you know more than everybody, clearly. Because I was told from a fellow coach who was British, his kids were just constantly offside. Probably like 5 offside calls in a row. And he starts yelling at the ref. And I'm like, but I promise you, I'm right here. He was off. I promise you, he was off. Like, I wasn't trying to be rude or anything, but the kid was 5 yards off. And he goes to tell me, uh, all right, bruv, I can tell you've never touched a ball in your life. I was like, all right, okay. So if I speak with an accent, I guess maybe I would understand more. Um, yeah, I
That's the
just had to tell
rule.
that
That's the
story.
rule.
I had to tell
In
that.
the
I had
United
to tell that
States, we
story
speak with an
because
accent.
it is. It's like you see all these different influences. I've coached just in the last 2 weeks against British coaches, an African coach, Hispanic coach. Um, I coach with a Colombian. He's my, me and him coach our 2012 boys. Like,
Hmm.
you're absolutely right. The amount of different influence in America, I think, is there's more differences. I'm trying to figure out how to say it. There's more differences in coaching influence in America than there is in any other country. Does that make
And
sense?
that's going to be, yeah, no, that's going to be the challenge that we're going to have to figure out as a nation. But I think again, this World Cup does stand to just get more American kids excited about soccer, right? And I
Hmm.
think that
Yes.
you and I are of a similar age. We're of a generation that had people who we were of a generation who had a generation of people above us who like played soccer. I distinctly remember. So I am an only child
Yes.
for the most part. I have three younger brothers who are like much younger than I am. But like I had cousins who played soccer growing up, and they played. I distinctly remember them playing soccer. Right. I had my backdoor neighbor, the girl who lived behind me, was like 4 years older than I am. She played soccer. These are why people who got me into wanting to play soccer, right?
Hmm.
So we're just getting more and more of those examples. But now we're going to have
Hmm.
people like you and I, or people like my cousin who played collegiately, all these people who are going to start being able to actually coach up the younger generations. And that's
Hmm.
where we'll start figuring out what an American style looks like. But overall, this World Cup stands to be a very exciting moment for US soccer if our players are allowed to play at their best. And I think that's what we just keep coming back to is we have very exciting, technically gifted, talented players. Will the system force them into playing the way that the coach wants them to play? Or will they feel some freedom to express themselves on the field and create moments of brilliance that are required to win a World Cup
Hmm.
match? Because that's how you win the World Cup, to be quite honest. Not everyone can be Germany. You know, you have to have moments of even Spain in their World Cup win did it because they had moments of individual brilliance.
Hmm.
So the question
You're
now
always going to
becomes,
have that.
yeah, exactly. Like that the question now becomes who can provide that, and we'll
Hmm.
find out. I think we have so many players who can do that. And that's the exciting part is you're gonna see Gio Reyna dribble through several people. You'll probably see Brendan Aronson create a turnover, press high, immediately win and go toward goal and probably get a shot off. You'll see Christian Pulisic cut up a player on the run. Like I'm hoping that we get these moments because those are the individual things that, like, I'm also excited to see Walker Zimmerman jump over 18 people to win a header. Like
I
those are
mean,
the things that you get excited about.
but if we're being honest, let's look at, let's say, 10 goals from World Cup qualifying. Not that that's how many we scored. Let's just take 10. Out of those 10, maybe one of them was based on the system. All the other ones were individual moments, whether it was a header like that, or like
Yeah.
Weston off a set piece, or, Dest coming in, you know, laces untied, slipping to his left and
Yeah.
smashing it past Killer. Now, like that's how we score goals anyways. We're
Yeah.
scoring
I think
despite the
I think the
system.
goal of the system is to put your players in positions to make those moments of brilliance, right? Because we can look at the goal that Christian scored against Mexico at home. That was a system type goal. Ricardo Pepi had a system goal or two against Jamaica, right? Like obviously the system creates goals, but to your point, the Serginho Dest goal was because of a general setup, but
Mhm.
that was out of system. That's not the system,
Well, but see,
But
that to
that,
me, that is purposeful coaching. Can I put my players in a position to succeed? Let me
right,
use their strengths, and hide their weaknesses if I need to. That's how you coach.
right.
We aren't Man City to where you can literally score 3 or 4 goals based on the same thing because your guys are literally freaks of nature because you have spent gazillions of dollars to get the greatest soccer players in the world. Like, that is just difficult to do when you are not going to be far and away the most talented players or the most talented side on the pitch.
Right.
You can, like, when you play Cuba, yeah, you're gonna have 2 or 3 system goals for sure.
Yeah. I mean,
Because
and
they're
that's the thing
not
is the system is cool when it's able to be implemented.
exactly.
But are we going to be able to implement that system against England? Are we going to, we probably will get chances to do it against Wales and Iran. So the question now becomes, can we create enough chances through the system to score goals? And that's going to be my question throughout the World Cup is the system creating goal scoring opportunities? Because that was a problem throughout qualifying. All right, let's wrap all this up. We've taken a big picture approach to where we are right now for the USMNT. We have a roster coming out on Wednesday that we will have a reaction episode to later in this week. If you could take 3 words to describe the team right now, what would they be?
Inexperienced, searching, first 2, just kind of the reality. They're inexperienced, period. Doesn't matter how talented we are. The boys are inexperienced. Searching because of the taste that we have in our mouth based on the last 2 friendlies. I say searching because I think there might be players that came off the pitch going, "What was that? Like, what did we just do?" I don't know what Berhalter's telling them. I don't know. Maybe they know exactly what happened. Maybe he was saying, "Guys, this is full-on experiment. Whether we win, lose, who cares? Doesn't matter." Maybe they do know. But as far as fans, I have no clue what it was. And then hopeful because of the talent, because of the individual talents that we have, and the excitement that we have, and then the fact that it's a World Cup and who knows what's going to happen. Let's have a 2018 Russia run.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Incredible.
Mine would be capable yet unproven are the
Mhm.
3 words that I would use because to kind of what you said is that there's so much talent. They're very young. We've given our 3 words on what we feel like this team is. We'll have another roster reaction episode coming out this week. So, Caleb, where can we find you on all the socials? And let's get out of here.
It's USMNT Corner and J. Caleb Cook 1 on the Twitters.
Follow him there. Follow him for throughout the World Cup so you get his takes. We'll be doing shows throughout the World Cup to break down the games that happen. Again, you can follow the show at Soccer for Us Pod. Make sure you subscribe to Soccer Down Here to get all of the content that'll come out, not only during the World Cup, but here on after. And make sure if you want to support the podcast, do so at buymeacoffee.com/soccerforuspod. Again, Caleb, thanks for being here. Everyone, thanks for listening. I'm Bart. I'm out.